In my time here with WMAY, I've interviewed a former president. I've interviewed presidential candidates. I've interviewed governors and governor candidates and congressmen and senators and a whole host of community groups and activists. And I took a bunch of your phone calls, and it's such an honor and a pleasure. But I gotta say, somebody who was actually one of the first sources I talked to regularly in my coverage of Springfield city governments, all the way back 13 years ago, is former Alderman Joe McMenamin, and he joins us here today. And I just want to thank him for being so open with even a young pup reporter back then. Joe, thanks for taking time. How you been, man?
Well, thanks a lot, Greg, and I hope I do get to interview you this morning. Can we just start anywhere?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess a good foundation is, just for those who don't know, Friday, tomorrow, is my last live broadcast day here on WMAY. If you don't know, this is my part-time gig, right? So coming in here every morning, weekdays, 3 hours, producing myself, scheduling guests myself, doing the video operation myself, getting things where they need to go, and so on. It's taxing. There's a lot to it. You have to have a certain amount of passion to do this. But this has been my part-time gig. My full-time gig with the Center Square and Illinois Radio Network, that's expanding. I'm going to continue doing that. And that State House coverage that people rely on across the state, I'm going to continue doing that. So be sure to follow me on my social channels. Just search Bishop on Air, and you can make that happen. But with the role expanding with my full-time gig, I got to have some kind of work-life balance, Joe, right? I mean, I got to be able to, I want to spend time with my wife. I want to spend time on the house. I want to go travel some more. So obviously, you can't do everything at once. But let's get into it. Yeah. You want to interview me? All right, let's go.
So balance is real important. I agree with that. And you are just loaded with energy, production skill, vision. And at the bottom of it, Greg, I think you have a conviction, a strong conviction, that democracy depends on an informed electorate. And you try to keep folks informed. And we're finding that more and more difficult these days. But let's go back to the starting point. Who was mayor when you first got involved with WMAY?
When I first got involved with WMAY, it was Tim Davlin.
Tim Davlin.
Yeah.
So you experienced him taking his own life. Yep. And the almost turmoil of who will succeed Davlin. There's a lot of infighting within the city council. Right. Were you doing the Council Roundup at that point?
Not at that point. No, I think the Council Roundup came around shortly after with your first term, quite frankly. So I think I started really covering city council closely at that time, and that's where the Council Roundup kind of just developed, because there's a lot of cutting room floor stuff that I was like, no, this is good stuff. This puts things into context for the listeners. We should just have a show about a lot of this stuff that doesn't make the little snippets in the news clips.
So I was 58 back then, and I hadn't really followed local radio that much till then. I was more like NPR, and my time was so limited. But then I really focused on local radio, local talk radio, and it was a source of information. I'm in a representative capacity. Right. I have to know what folks are thinking. And you and Ray Lytle, you really brought in, what was happening at the Springfield City Council. Yep. And lots of folks would say to me, hey, I heard you on WMAY. Hey, I heard you, Wednesday morning. I heard you Wednesday morning. You had a broad following. And
still, I mean, listen, the Council Roundup is one of those programs that people rely on, because we know that the print world, people have to, if you don't realize this, print reporters, especially in a market the size of Springfield, they have to get their stories into edit by like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is unbelievable. The council doesn't even meet then, so you're not going to be getting the latest council happenings Wednesday morning's newspaper. So the Council Roundup kind of helped fill that void, and it still will. The Council Roundup's going to continue on. It's just not going to be hosted by me, but a lot of effort goes into that. There's no question.
I can't think of anyone currently that has the depth of knowledge and the understanding of procedure at the city council. You don't get any of that from TV 20 reporters. They switch every 1 or 2 years. And print media, we used to have a dedicated SJR reporter who covered nothing but city council. Now you've got Steve Speary spread among about 4 or 5 different beats: business, police, etc. So you are it. I mean, and you're going to be it'll be a big loss, Greg. Who do you think anyone will come in here that will take low wages to cover? I mean, you got several sources of income. I understand that, but this is just one source of income. But who is going to come in at 3 in the morning and start figuring out what happened on a 3-hour city council meeting, and then do the production work you do with all those cut-ins and cut-outs?
Yeah, and listen, I think you raise a good point. I get paid to do this. It's clear I do get paid to do this. It's a medium-sized market, so it's not like I'm getting millions of dollars or anything like that. But you have to have a passion for it. And I think that's something you're kind of hinting here at is in order to do it justice, you really do have to get up early or, stay out late with the city council while you guys are in session when you were in the city council, for instance, because meetings would range from 30 minutes to 3.5 hours. So clearly you have to stay with it, and it can be exhausting at times. But there's a technical know-how and a savvy that you have to really be able to pull that off.
You probably haven't had a chance to really reflect upon, your at least 12 years covering city council. And so I hate to even ask questions like, what was the most memorable interview? What was the most memorable issue you covered? What was the hottest button?
Yeah, I think really what elevated at least my coverage of the city council was the police file destruction story. And that was, at least initially one of the first major things where it wasn't just a flash in the pan story that maybe was printed somewhere. It was a continuation week after week. There were different developments. It was brought up at the city council regularly. So that seemed to be at least one of the storylines that at least my in-depth coverage got a lot of people's attention.
So that was a Freedom of Information Act with wanting files from the police department, and they destroyed the files so they wouldn't have to disclose the files. Is that what happened?
That's, if you recall, you were on the council during that time, and it sparked a lot of controversy. Former deputy police chief being involved, and whether or not they destroyed the file of him going down to Missouri and shooting a gun off into the lake, and there are all kinds of different ins and outs of that story. But that really was one of those storylines where it was like, this is significant, and we need to have continued coverage, in-depth coverage, but not just the coverage, but allowing for people to hear what the officials are saying. And that was something that the Council Roundup provided. I would say, though, another major issue, not a controversy like the police destruction document story, but the pension issue. And that was something else that, covering you early on, you raised that as part of your campaign. And then when you were on the city council, you raised that regularly in a way that I think people needed to hear more about. Instead of just a number up on a board somewhere, you went into the particulars as to why the pension situation is the way it is and how are we going to get out of that. And
that's going to come back. It's not gone forever. It's kind of percolating right now. But getting back to that police files destruction issue, I think that more than anything else tanked Mayor Houston's term. I mean, he made a promise he'd only run one term, and then he wanted to run a second term, but he didn't make it past the primary. But it also, Greg, during that time period, the City Corporation Council had to leave office, and one of his assistants had to leave office.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yep. Mark Kerr.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mark, similar name. Yeah.
So long ago. I mean.
Yeah. Mayor Houston went through 4 city attorneys.
Yeah.
That you can't survive well when your top people are changing chairs that frequently.
Right.
Mayor Langfelder, he had 8 years with Jim Zirkle. Did you interview Jim Zirkle much?
Not much, no. And sometimes, because if you recall, I was physically in the council chambers at that time when WMAY was my only job, right? So I would go to the physical council chambers and be there the entire meeting, and then I would come in the next morning bright and early and chop stuff up. So after meetings, there were times to talk with people directly. I'd interview you after a meeting. I'd interview the mayor after a meeting. There'd be what we call press gaggles surrounding people about a controversial issue. Rarely did we talk with the corporation councils, though.
He was a workhorse, Zirkle, so he's always working. He's not a show horse, a workhorse. He knew how to get things done. So getting to the pensions, have you followed so Illinois consolidated all those small police and fire pensions into one aggregate. a large pension fund with the idea of better rates of return at lower cost.
Yep.
And are you familiar? That's sitting before the Illinois Supreme Court?
Yeah, the Illinois Supreme Court has that case, and I think the fire fund has like $8 billion. The police fund has about $7 or $8 billion, and they're essentially arguing that the consolidation took away local control, takes away the local police and fire pension board votes and their ability to steer things one way or the other, and just the general concern as well of, why should a well-funded public safety pension fund locally have to add to the possible, investment returns of, a lower performing pension fund that hasn't put in the necessary dollars. So there's some interesting things that are going to happen with that Supreme Court case.
Yeah, that's Illinois constitutional challenges to that legislation that passed 4 years ago, and it's taken a while for the case to percolate up to the highest level. So those are two major stories you followed, which was the files destruction at Springfield Police Department, and then the pension issue. Now we've got the current mayor in her seat for about 5 months, I guess. What's the biggest issue you've followed there?
She came in with a storm. Literally. What was it, 20 days or so after she took office, 30 days. All of a sudden you have the derecho hit. So she, I guess, trial by fire or trial by storm, really, right? Other than that, I mean, I think the political divide seems to be more apparent in some cases. It's always there. And, of course, Springfield City Council is nonpartisan. They run as nonpartisans to get on the Springfield City Council. But clearly there's partisans on the city council. A lot of times you don't notice it because it's, sometimes 9-1 votes or it's 10-0 votes, and you don't really notice the partisanship. But it does rear its head every once in a while, and I think I've seen that a few times just listening to the council meetings now.
Were you surprised by the low participation rate in the latest city council races back in April?
I am always surprised by local voter turnout, period. It's incredible. And keep that thought. I got to take a break, but keep that thought because I think that's something that we definitely have to touch on. We're talking with former Springfield Alderman Joe McMenamin, one of the first sources that I talked with regularly when we started our in-depth coverage of the Springfield City Council. So stay tuned. We'll have back with our conversation with former Springfield Alderman Joe McMenamin in studio. He's one of the guests and sources that I talked with a lot when I first started really delving into news coverage here with WMAY. And you were talking before the break there, Joe, about low voter turnout. What was it most recently? It was like 20 some odd % or something?
Well, it's better in some areas than in other areas, but even worse than low voter turnout was low candidate turnout.
Yeah.
In other words, we had 5 uncontested aldermanic seats. We had 3 open seats. Usually that attracts a lot of candidates. Barely any interest, 1 or 2 candidates per open seat. I compared that to when the former government first changed in 1988, Greg, and we had over 80 candidates in all the different races for the 10 seats and the 3 citywide offices.
No kidding.
And compare that to today. And it's not just lack of participation by candidates, we don't get a broad spectrum of types of candidates. By that I mean it's all government employees or retired government employees. Nothing wrong with government, but we need a broad spectrum. Where's the private sector interest? Right. I think I was the only one. I don't think there's anyone on the council right now that's private sector. You go around the horseshoe, they're all government or retired government. Now I understand Lakeisha Purchase has left IDOT, and who reports on that? You can't cover the whole state, plus the details of.
Well, and I tell you, we were talking a little bit off air about just the, I guess, evolution of media, and I think that's another element that we should definitely talk about here is where we're at right now, and how do we? And I'd love to hear your suggestions. How do we get that back for that local coverage? Because I'll tell you, one of the things that I regret. In the past few years is I have people reaching out all the time with this local story is happening, and I don't have the bandwidth to tackle it. because of the coverage I do for the State House and the managing of other things. So, just being able to try to delve into such a story that requires a significant amount of leg room or leg work, you have to put in those resources to do that. And we've seen a lack of that in Springfield. Some long legacy reporters retiring or getting bought out, and the different print outlets not necessarily doing the investigative work that they used to be able to do. Joe, you've seen it yourself, and it's disappointing. How do you suggest we get back to that?
I don't have any suggestions. We're in such a state of evolution right now with news coverage, and there's so many potential sources of information, but not enough common sources of information. When I was growing up, one of 7 brothers, when Newsweek weekly magazine came, or U.S. News and World Report, or Time, we'd fight over those magazines. Who got to have it first. I don't see the common sources of information, respected common sources of information. I don't respect our former President Trump. I think he's really disrupted the respect that we should have for our democracy and our political process. And people don't trust anymore.
Well, do you think that that's maybe how the media reacted to him as well? I mean, he can't be the only person responsible for that. He was dogged by 3-4 years of investigations and Russia-Trump collusion and all kinds of other stuff, with the media just running ridiculous, unfounded stories. Some of them may have been founded. The Stormy Daniels stuff is ridiculous, but hey, there's something there. Yeah. But doesn't the media also have a role in providing that objective, non-biased approach to things?
Well, he probably, he was mistreated at times, but I think he's basically a con man. That's the way I view President Trump, and I think he did enormous damage to our nation, and the big lie, challenging the results of our elections without substance. Do you believe in the rule of law or not? If you want to challenge an election, you don't do it through storming our Capitol building on January 6th. You do it through litigation. You cover litigation. That's the proper way to do it.
Well, and I'll tell you, I don't want to veer too much on into that because we debate hours about January 6th and the media's coverage of Trump, for instance. But I know that the former president has said that he wants to litigate it. He wasn't allowed to litigate it. He took it to courts, but courts just dismissed it. They didn't want to hear the evidence, and he apparently is going to get that opportunity now that he's facing criminal charges. So we'll see what happens there. But back to the local landscape here. Do you have any hope? Is there any glimmer anywhere where you can see saying we're going to get back to those days of, like a city council beat reporter from the local newspaper or the alternative press like the Illinois Times, or, more in-depth coverage? How do you see us getting there, if at all?
Geez, I wasn't prepared for that question. It's going to be a long struggle, I think. I think our educators will play a key role. Our kids going through grade school, high school, college, what they can learn properly and have a broad understanding of history and understanding what character means and true values. I don't quite know what's in the future. I do know that we have a great history, the United States. We stand for a lot of what's good, and wow. What? You're younger. You're about in your 40s?
40, yeah.
In your 40s. You mean, are you maintaining contact with your buddies you grew up with?
Some, yeah, a few of them, sure. They're not necessarily as plugged into what's going on, globally, locally, or statewide as much as I am, because, again, I get paid to do that. But I also feel, since I do, being able to disseminate information as best as possible in a as non-biased a way as possible, I think is extremely important. And that's really what my main drive is. But wrapping up here, and former Alderman Joe McMenamin with us, one of the first sources that I talked with regularly when I started doing talk radio journalism years ago. Talk about the importance. Why do people need to be plugged in? What's going on locally?
Well, because we want strong communities, strong neighborhoods, which create a strong state, which creates strong government. I did bring you 2 gifts, Greg.
Oh, sure.
We've got Doris Kearns Goodwin, her treatment of Abraham Lincoln when he was president, and his team of rivals.
Oh, my gosh.
That's the kind of leadership we need. We need to be inspired by Lincoln. We are the land of Lincoln here. You know, Lincoln, when he came in as president, he took rivals and brought in rivals.
Right.
That's what we need in our government. We need people to get along, to understand each other instead of ridiculing each other. Someone else has written a book about Lincoln, how Lincoln never ridiculed or mocked his rivals. You know, they were above that. And here's another gift for you. This one is this guy. He is a client. The photographer Robert Shaw. He did a whole bunch of photos of places that Lincoln traveled to and buildings he was in, and he took photographs as if it's still the way it was back then. So you don't see telephone lines necessarily, you know, or automobiles in the photos and that kind of thing. So here's some, and I talk about in here about how, you know, thank you, Greg, for keeping the public informed. It's hugely important, and we need more of it, and we've lost so much of it.
Alderman, I can't thank you. I wasn't expecting you to bring me gifts. No, I really do appreciate that, and I'll definitely read those and cherish those because being here this more than a decade after jumping into the fire of local news coverage. You definitely were somebody who is willing to talk, open and willing to have conversations and join us in studio on the phone and delve into these tough topics from pensions to civic engagement. And it's obvious that that's an important thing that needs to continue. So
listeners out there, thank Greg for what he's done for local government here in Springfield, Illinois. When I left office, I got enough thank yous from constituents. And Greg, you need a whole bunch. You've earned them.
I appreciate that.
Those Wednesday morning council roundups,
it's
outstanding.
Work. It's a lot of work. There's no question. Former Alderman Joe McMenamin, thank you so much for taking time with us, and we'll talk again very soon, all right?
Thanks a lot, Greg, always.
It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News.